One rainy afternoon in Lagos, Adana steps out of a rusty Danfo bus into the upscale shopping district of Lekki. She walked right through the doors of Deluxe Boutique, the most luxurious boutique where Lagos's richest ladies came not just to shop, but to flaunt their wealth. Adana wore a faded Ankara blouse and wrapper, her old rubber slippers scraping against the shiny marble floor, and the nylon bag she held rustled in the wind. She wipes the sweat of the hot Nigerian sun off her forehead and adjusts her headscarf, ignoring the stares of passers-by. She looked out of place, but Adana had a secret so big it would leave everyone shocked to their bones. When Adana stepped inside, the soft chime of the door made everyone turn their eyes to see who was coming in. Conversations halted mid-sentence as they looked at her. Her presence was like a ripple through still water, unwelcome and disruptive. One employee, a slim woman named Bola, whispered to her colleague, "Who let this one in? Does she even know how much one earring costs here?" Another, a young man with a sharp suit and an even sharper tongue, giggled. "Maybe she thinks this is a Oshodi market," he muttered, loud enough for the others to hear. The employees laughed, some openly, others behind polite hands. Adana ignored the whispers and took a few steps forward. Her eyes wandered over the jewelry displays and the expensive lace fabrics, the diamonds sparkling under the bright lights. She stood there waiting for someone to assist her, but no one approached. Instead, they huddled in groups, throwing glances in her direction and whispering among themselves. After a few moments, one of the employees, Amara, decided to approach her. Amara was tall, with a sleek ponytail and a practiced smile that disappeared the moment she reached Adana. "Excuse me," Amara said, her tone cold and sharp. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Adana looked up, startled. "Yes," she replied softly, clutching her nylon bag. Amara raised an eyebrow, her eyes scanning Adana from head to toe with barely concealed disdain. "Well," she continued, crossing her arms, "this store isn't exactly for people like you. The prices here might be too much for you. Maybe you would be more comfortable in Belogan. We don't sell Okrika clothes here." Adana blinked, her cheeks flushing. She didn't reply. Instead, she looked at the expensive lace and diamond necklace. As Amara was staring at Adana, suddenly the boutique's front door swung open. A group of beautiful, high-class women, draped in designer clothes and dripping with gold, walked in, their laughter echoing across the room. Without hesitation, Amara and the other employees hurried toward them, their attention fully fixed on the glamorous customers, greeting them with bright, eager smiles. "Welcome, madam," one of the employees gushed. "How can we assist you today?" The women, clearly enjoying the attention, waved them off. "We're just looking," one of them said, flipping her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. Adana stood alone by the counter, her presence seemingly forgotten. She watched as the employees fussed over the group, offering champagne and fawning over their every word. She clenched her hands tightly, feeling the sting of humiliation. What they didn't know was that Adana, the dirty and poor-looking woman, had a stack of 20 million naira cash in her nylon bag, ready to be spent. But where did such a woman find this much money? As Adana stood there, her eyes fixed on the expensive lace, a new employee named Temini emerged from the back room. Temini, a young woman with kind eyes and a simple demeanor, noticed Adana standing by herself, looking lost and out of place. Without hesitation, she walked over. "Good afternoon, Ma," Temini said softly, her tone warm and respectful. "Do you need any help?" Adana looked up, surprised by the kindness in Temini's voice. "Yes, please," she said. "I'd like to see some of the most beautiful laces and diamonds in your store." Temini smiled and began to show Adana around, pointing out various items and detailing their craftsmanship. As she mentioned the prices, Adana nodded and said, "Pick that one for me, and that one too." Temini hesitated at first, unsure if Adana understood the cost of the items. "Ma, these are quite expensive," she said cautiously. "I know," Adana replied firmly. "Pick them up." Soon, Temini's hands were full of the most expensive jewelry and lace in the store. The other employees, noticing Temini's actions, grew curious. They left the wealthy-looking women, who were still browsing and not buying anything, and rushed over. "Temini, let us help you," one of them offered, eyeing the glittering diamond she was holding. They crowded around Temini and Adana. Another employee turned to Adana with a forced smile. Would you like some champagne or water while you shop, Ma? Adana didn't even look at them. She continued to speak only to Temeni, who escorted her to the private lounge to wait while her items were packaged. As Adana sat in the plush private lounge, sipping water from a crystal glass, suddenly the door swung open, and two familiar voices echoed through the store. James's mother, Mama Abiola, and his sister Eniola walked in, their high heels clicking aggressively against the floor. This shop is so quiet today, Mama Abiola said loudly, waving at the employees. I hope business is booming. You know, we don't want poor people hanging around here. The employees laughed nervously, their eyes darting toward the lounge where Adana sat. Mama Abiola's gaze followed theirs, and when she spotted Adana, her face twisted in disgust. She grabbed Eniola's arm and marched toward the lounge. What is this nonsense? Mama Abiola barked as she approached Adana. Who let this wretched, low-class village pauper in here? Adana looked up calmly, her expression unreadable. Eniola said, her voice dripping with disdain. This isn't a place for beggars. Get out before you embarrass yourself any further. Temeni entered the lounge at that moment, holding a large bag filled with the items Adana had purchased. Here are your things, Ma, and your receipt for the 20 million naira you spent, she said, handing the bag to Adana with a respectful bow. Mama Abiola and Eniola froze, their mouths hanging open as they heard the amount. Their shock deepened as Adana stood, collected the bag, and turned to them. As the women stood there in shock staring at Adana, the boutique's door swung open again. Two men in sharp suits entered, their presence immediately silencing the room. They approached Mama Abiola, the boutique owner, and handed her an official-looking envelope. You have 1 month to vacate the premises, one of the men said firmly. This building has been sold. Mama Abiola's face turned pale as her hands trembled, clutching the letter. What? Sold? Who bought it? Please, I'll speak to them. Everyone knows the shop. I cannot move it. This is my life. The man adjusted his tie and replied coolly, The building now belongs to Zenith Group of Companies. There's a phone number on the letter where you can contact the CEO. The room fell into stunned silence. Mama Abiola and the women stared at the paper, trying to process the shocking news. Suddenly, the men turned toward Adana, who had been standing quietly near the counter. Without hesitation, one of them picked up her shopping bag. Ma'am, he said with a respectful nod, the driver is waiting. The entire store froze as the men stepped behind Adana, escorting her out of the boutique. Adana, in her simple clothes and worn slippers, walked out with her head held high, her security detail walking beside her. Outside the luxury boutique, a sleek black luxury car with tinted windows was waiting. One of the men opened the door, and Adana gracefully stepped inside before the car glided away. Mama Abiola and Amara stood rooted to the spot, their jaws slack with disbelief. The wretched Adana, these women they had ignored, was not only their landlord, but someone they had underestimated entirely. Their shock was beyond words. So viewers, who is Adana and how did we get here? Sit back and enjoy the story, and please don't forget to subscribe. Thank you. Just a few years ago, Mama Abiola's life had revolved around her son James, a hard-working young man who had taken on the role of a provider after his father's death at a very young age. He was a kind-hearted man who put family above everything else. He built a business empire from nothing, ensuring his mother and sister, Eniola, lived in luxury. He provided everything they needed and gave them access to every luxury and comfort they asked for. They managed the household and controlled most of his money, but their fear of losing control over James's money consumed them. They sabotaged every relationship he had, desperate to not let any other woman come in and take over. When James introduced Chinonso, the woman he wanted to marry, Mama Abiola and Eniola did everything they could to discourage James. But when that didn't work, they devised a sinister plan. They hired a mechanic to cut Chinonso's car brakes, intending to scare her off. But on the fateful day, James drove the car instead. As he was driving, the car veered off the road and crashed into a concrete barrier. The aftermath was devastating. He was left paralyzed from the waist down. The resulting accident left him paralyzed. Chinonso, who was also in the car, had only a few bruises. Mama Abiola and Eniola were consumed with guilt and regret over the devastating consequences of their actions. What began as an attempt to harm Chinonso spiraled out of control, leaving her son paralyzed instead. Unable to face the weight of their guilt, they directed their frustration and blame at Chinonso, overwhelming her with their anger. Unable to bear the constant hostility, Chinonso made the heartbreaking decision to leave James, walking away from the life she had fought so hard to build. Desperate for a caregiver for James, Mama Abiola found Adana, a shy, jobless graduate from a poor village family. She was kind and humble, the perfect person Mama Abiola thought she could control. Mama Abiola wanted someone to control and manipulate, ensuring that James's household ran smoothly without threatening her power. James's mother and sister despised Adana. To them, she was a nobody, a poor girl from the village who had no place in their affluent world. They treated her like dirt, barking orders and belittling her at every turn. "She's getting too comfortable," James's sister, Eniola, sneered one afternoon. "You should send her back to the village before she starts thinking she belongs here." James's mother nodded in agreement. "She's just a servant. Don't let her forget that." James, however, was unmoved. He saw something in Adana that his family never could: resilience, loyalty, and a heart full of kindness. Adana, kind-hearted and hard-working, quickly earned James's trust by tending to his needs with genuine care. One night, Adana found James in his study, struggling with quarterly reports. Without a word, she made him tea and organized his papers. By morning, she had created a new filing system and gave him ideas of how to some complex problems with his company. "How did you know these?" James asked curiously. "Oh, I have a first class in business management," Adana replied. "I just couldn't find a job, you know how it is?" she said. Mama Abiola came out of her bedroom after eavesdropping on their conversation. "You are just a house help, so stick to scrubbing the floors and cooking, okay?" she yelled at Adana. But James was shocked but comforted that now he has someone he can get some ideas from. Adana was so kind and gentle, and her warmth reminded James of what he had lost: love and companionship. Slowly, his affection for Adana grew, sparking jealousy in Eniola, who saw Adana as a threat to their influence. James and Adana's relationship blossomed into something serious. When Adana became pregnant, Mama Abiola and Eniola accused her of infidelity and tried to throw her out. But James stood by her. He refused to let his mother and sister destroy his relationship like they had been doing for years. Days before their planned wedding, James died mysteriously in his sleep. Adana was devastated. She was 3 months pregnant and her world shattered. After the funeral, at the will reading, the final blow came. James had left 20 million naira to his mother and sister, then sold everything he had, the house and companies, to a new company called Zenith Groups. Adana was left with nothing, not even a roof over her head. They laughed at Adana, who left with nothing but her unborn child. "You're nothing but a village girl who got lucky," her sister-in-law Regina had spat as they stood in the lawyer's office after her husband's death. "Go back to your mud hut. The Okonjo fortune belongs to real family." "Go back to your village," Regina had said. "A dirty house girl like you doesn't belong in Lagos." Adana stood frozen, tears streaming down her face as she was thrown out into the street. The lawyer, Mr. Adebayo, was so kind. He took Adana to his house and later got a small apartment for her to stay. Months after James's baby was born, the lawyer visited Adana in the small apartment he had rented for both her and her son. "I have something for you," he said. "James was brilliant until the end," he said, placing a thick envelope on her table. "Your husband was a very wise man," Mr. Adebayo said with a big smile. "He sold everything to a new company, Zenith Group, before he died. Want to know who owns that company?" He showed Adana some papers. The company belonged to her. James had given her everything: the house, the business, all his money. He just kept it secret to protect her from his greedy family. Adana learned that James had done more than just give her his money. He made sure his mom and sister couldn't steal it. They didn't know that when they opened their fancy store, Glamour Palace, they were renting the building from Adana's company. Adana's heart raced as she processed the revelation. The wealth she had been denied was hers, but the betrayal of James's family still stung. So now, 2 years later, Adana stood in their store in her old clothes. Regina and Mama Okanyo were still being mean to people they thought were poor. After Adana had left the boutique, Mama Abiola and her daughter Eniola were left in utter shock. They couldn't fathom what had just happened. Their boutique, their only source of income, had only a month left before eviction. Desperate and out of options, they decided to summon the courage to call the number on the eviction notice. A few days later, Adana answered their call and set up a meeting. She gave them an address that left them speechless, a mansion they knew had been sold long ago. Confused but desperate, they decided to go to the address. When they arrived, they were greeted by a sight that stunned them. Adana and a young boy stood at the grand entrance of the mansion. "How is this possible?" Mama Abiola stammered. "How are you living in a house my son sold?" Adana smiled faintly, her expression a mix of triumph and sorrow. "Well, you see, the house, the companies, and even the building where your shop is located were all sold to Zenith Groups. And I own Zenith Groups." Mama Abiola and Eniola staggered backward, their faces pale. They slumped into the chairs nearby, unable to process the revelation. Adana continued, her voice steady but firm. "James knew the truth about you. He found out you tampered with the brakes to scare his girlfriend. He knew how greedy and wicked you were. So he protected me and our son from your wickedness." Tears streamed down Mom Abiola and Eniola's faces as they realized the depth of their betrayal. We didn't know it would come to this," Eniola choked out. "We are so sorry." Adana's young son stepped in front of his mother, his curious eyes taking in the strangers. Adana knelt beside him and gently introduced him. "James Jr., meet your grandmother and your aunt." The little boy looked up at his mother, then cautiously approached the two women. "Hi," he said shyly before hugging them. Mama Abiola and Eniola wept harder, overwhelmed by guilt and the innocence of the child. Adana took a deep breath. "I have forgiven you, for my son's sake, so he can know his father's family. But I will never forget what you did to James and me. Your actions were cruel and wicked." She paused, letting her words sink in before adding, "I have extended your deluxe boutique's lease for 2 more years. Make good use of this chance." She said. Mama Abiola and Eniola fell to their knees, crying and thanking Adana profusely. They couldn't believe the grace she had shown despite their past wickedness. Adana watched them, her heart heavy but resolute. She had made peace, not for them, but for herself and her son. As she held James Jr.'s hand, she whispered softly, "Let's go, my love." The boy looked up at her and smiled, his innocence a reminder of the purity she now strived to protect. Mama Abiola and Eniola watched them leave, forever marked by the lesson their actions had taught them. What moral lesson did you get from this story? What would you have done if you were James? If you like this story like I did, please like, share with your friends and family, and please subscribe to show your support.